Welcome back to this special edition of The Heat as we discuss the new president of the United States, Donald Trump. We're looking now at a live picture of the White House. Of course, as from tonight, it has a new tenant. President Obama left the White House earlier today. President Trump moved in earlier today as well. Of course, this is a very carefully choreographed operation, one president leaving, a new one taking office as well. We're also looking at live pictures right now of a protest taking place in Washington. There have been protests all day, in fact, against the inauguration of President Trump by people who oppose him, by people who don't agree with him. We will continue right now with our panel. And Atiba, I want to look at one issue which partly domestic, partly foreign, and that is climate change. You know, we look at climate change, we look at that big Paris Accord on climate change, something that was championed by the United States and by China. President Trump said there is a possibility that he might pull out of that deal. In fact, today, only hours, in fact, I think it was only minutes after he took office, all reference to climate change on the White House website was taken down. Do you think, you know, if you look at climate change, other executive actions that were taken by President Obama, that President Trump is going to reverse a lot of those executive actions very quickly?
Well, first off, the president, former President Obama, said that climate change was a national security issue for our country. We have a president who's never been in public office, who's never worked on public policy. So when President Obama became president, there were a lot of people who felt that he had a learning curve. I really question and wonder what's this learning curve going to be with President Trump. Because when you talk about climate change, we just saw that the record came back this week that the temperatures were higher last year, another record. So we know that there is an issue and there is a problem, but part of that problem also affects the corporate ideas that Donald Trump has grown up under, that has made a lot of money from. So that entity is being attacked when you talk about climate change. And the Republicans have been adamantly opposed to anything that has to do with climate change. So this reversal in terms of what we see from President Trump, the question that I guess that I would say to look for is to see if they're removing everything from climate change from the website, what is it that is going to be replaced? And then how is that going to affect our relationships, again, abroad? Because that's what this continues that we continue to see, is how is this policy that the president is now taking, what are these stances that he's talked about on the campaign trail, how are they going to translate to the health and the stability of America? And this idea of being first, is it going to put us in being first against everything else that other countries are talking about?
Okay, Afshin, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I just want to get Victor's take on this. Victor, talking about climate change, you know, as I mentioned, both China and the United States led the way in the adoption of the Paris Accord, and China, of course, has seen the consequences of climate change, seen the consequences of a warming Earth in its cities. So is this a time when China is going to take the lead now in implementing those provisions that were adopted in Paris?
Well, first of all, the China-US cooperation on the Paris Climate Change Accord is one of the most important achievements that China and the United States have produced, and it's presented to the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations in front of the whole world. This is something both China and the United States should be proud of. President Donald Trump in previous months has talked about climate change being a hoax created by China. He forgot that China actually had reservation about the climate change, about the environmental protection, etc. But now it comes back to haunt us. We suffer the PM 2.5, we suffer from pollution problem, and we see the danger of the rising sea level, not only for the lower-lying island countries, but also along the coastal regions in China. We see significant changes in the weather patterns involving China. And this is one important reason why the Chinese government and the Chinese nation now have increased our conscientiousness about climate change and have redoubled their efforts to do whatever that's the right thing to do in protecting environment. Therefore, I think if President Donald Trump wants to withdraw from the climate change accord, it will be a shame. It will be a shame for the American people. It will be a shame for the world community. Therefore, I think President Donald Trump need to mature up and size up the situation and really climb up the steep learning curve to be a very good and effective president of the United States. And he should lead the United States, the most important country in the world, the largest economy in the world, if we use the official exchange rate as the benchmark, in the right direction, not only for the benefit of the United States, but also for the benefit of mankind. Otherwise, the world will suffer, and future generations of mankind will suffer if the climate change challenges are not dealt with in a timely manner. China, of course, will continue to do whatever that's the right thing for itself, but also for mankind. And China will be a champion of effective measures to be taken by China as well as the international community in terms of protecting the environment and champion for mitigating the effects of climate change.
Right, Afshin, looking at regional security interests, the president in his speech talked about peace through strength. He talked about rebuilding the U.S. military, of allocating more money to the U.S. military, and also of building missile systems capable of countering whatever threats may come from Iran or from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And we know that there have been ongoing talks about the DPRK's nuclear program. Does that sound ominous to you?
Well, you know, I think, again, this is an example where rhetoric is going to meet reality. And you brought up Iran, so let's just think about the Iran deal, for example. He spent about, a year and a half on the campaign trail criticizing George W. Bush for what he saw as Middle East adventurism, right? Well, if he were to go in and maybe, rip up the Iran deal, for example, well, then those centrifuges would begin spinning and he would be on a collision course potentially with Iran. He also spent a lot of time, proposing sort of an isolationist viewpoint. Confrontation with North Korea is not something he's going to want to do, and he's also going to find out that he's going to need cooperation from Beijing in that regard as well. So I think, one of the things that, rhetoric matters. And in this speech he delivered today, he delivered a speech that, he was successfully won this election because he was able to tap the anxieties of millions of Americans who were genuinely anxious, right? But what he needs to do now, and what I didn't see in the speech today, was tap their hopes. And I think that's what's going to have to happen next. Look, this is a nation of immigrants. This is he said hire American, buy American and hire Americans, right? There's a whole, Silicon Valley would not exist were it not for the H-1B visa and all these immigrants who are, supporting Apple and Microsoft and all these great companies. So whether it's foreign policy or whether it's domestic policy, I think sometimes his rhetoric gets ahead of the reality.
I'd just like to add, one of the things that I find, I think the piece about hope is very important because the president didn't offer any hope. He offered a hope, okay, I'm going to bring back jobs, but he has not. I don't know if that is part of what he can do. I don't know if that's part of his character. I don't know if he can do the part about offering hope because everything that he's done, whether or not it's reality television or whether or not it's running a campaign, is basically telling people that there's something that you're not getting. You've got to watch me. I don't know if he knows how to offer hope, and that will be part of how we see it. Does he mature as a president and being able to offer that to the American people and the world?
Yeah, that was part of the election rhetoric as well when he talked about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, jobs that went to China. Almost every economist you talk to say those jobs are not coming back.
Yeah, because the other side of it is that those jobs have left. In terms of factories, we continue talking about that we have to figure out ways to retrain our workers. But the other side of it too is that we're more efficient now. Right. So where is that gap? Where is it that we're going to build those new jobs?
Go ahead, Raghida. You want to say something?
I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking that Donald Trump is going to want to be himself the negotiator, which is going to be new in a president of the United States. Normally, they like others to do this job. I think he's going to want to come in himself and say, I'm going to negotiate this because this is what I do well. And that's going to be interesting, whether it is with China or whether it's with Russia or whether it is with Iran. And I think it's going to change the dynamics of relationships with the world. And this is something that we need to pay attention to. I don't think he's going to be dogmatic, but I don't think he's going to change much in the sense of his hands-on approach to policy.
Right. Alexander, let's talk about NATO. President Trump has been very critical of NATO throughout the election campaign. Just 5 days ago, he called NATO obsolete, saying that he wanted good deals with Russia. And, when we talk about post-World War II security architecture. NATO, of course, is a central component of this. He's talked about, Russia playing a bigger role in security, of reducing nuclear stockpiles, of lifting sanctions. How big a change would this be if he manages to implement these, and what does that do to NATO?
Well, I think that President Putin is hopeful that something can be agreed with the Americans on the situation in Europe concerning NATO, because currently it is, from the point of view of Russia, it's a disaster what is going on with security, with the balance of security in Europe. So these words obviously were welcome in Moscow. It remains to be seen, to be honest, how in practice American policy will change, because I don't really see NATO being dismantled quickly, or NATO, the policy, security policy in Europe changing dramatically. But there is hope, because for Russia, NATO on its borders is probably the #1 security issue. And there are fears, for example, that NATO might be dragging in countries like Ukraine, which for Russia will probably be a disastrous outcome. So it is at the moment not really clear what about NATO. But if there is any opportunity for Russia to negotiate Ukraine to be a neutral country, which, by the way, was an ideal year when the Warsaw Pact was disbanded and the Soviet Union was left of it, was expecting NATO moving eastwards, and maybe even this obviously didn't happen, and now as an immediate danger to Russia. And I think that if Trump manages to somehow convince Russia that NATO will not be aggressive, and if NATO takes some sort of steps, for example, guaranteeing the neutrality of Ukraine, that would be a big change for Russia.
Okay.
That would be a big change for the whole security setup in Europe.
Okay, and that's where we have to end it. Time's caught up with us. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this special edition of The Heat. Stay with CGTN for more coverage of the Trump inauguration, and thanks for being with us.